Hi, everyone. My name is Amanda, and welcome to the first episode of Amanda the Logician. In this particular episode, being that it's my first, I think laying out the framework of expectations is important. So, I wanted to discuss the ultimate goal of this channel, discuss the why, as well as introduce myself to you all. But I wanted to start by expressing what this podcast is going to be about, or at least kind of what I intend for it to be about, as I'm someone who is adaptable and open to change. I think some things in life require stone feet. And if you're here from TikTok and have been following me, you know that I absolutely do believe that. I think you need to stand very true and grounded in your values and morals and personal character, right? You don't compromise that, and you certainly don't compromise that to appease other people. So I'm all about having stone feet in particular situations, but then I think there are other aspects in life in which you try not to be too rigid, or at least should try not to be too rigid. And this is one of those areas in which I'm willing to adapt and evolve according to the demands and needs of the community that we hopefully are able to build here. And I do say we. So, I wanted this to be a podcast channel exploring and discussing my personal thoughts, ideas, and perspectives amongst all sorts of philosophical, cultural, social, political, and interpersonal dynamics. But I wanted to do it from an intellectual lens that prioritizes logic and analytical reasoning and critical thinking and even progressivism as the framework. I wanted to be able to offer an alternative perspective to everyday matters that will foster, or at least hopefully foster, good faith discussion, critical conversations, and healthy discourse, even if at times it's uncomfortable, because uncomfortability is necessary for growth. I want it to be able to challenge what is deemed as the socially acceptable way of thinking. I wanted to help build the confidence and self esteem of listeners. And finally, I wanted to combat anti intellectualism, embrace knowledge, and seek truth. So let's jump into the ultimate goal, the why I'm doing a podcast, which is something I swore I'd never do and often even crack jokes about. And then I'll even introduce myself a little bit to you all and let you just know a little bit about me. So we'll start with the goal, right? What's the goal of this podcast? Sort of to reiterate something that I had mentioned earlier about the channel as a whole, one of my primary goals is to offer a different perspective and open up conversation regarding all sorts of topics, to hopefully create a community of people willing to engage with one another on these topics and offer their own perspectives and ideals. People who are even willing to combat mine and offer different rhetoric that's in opposition to what I have to say. A community of people who genuinely want to grow and be better versions of themselves. Now, this isn't to say that I can do that because I have some sort of supreme knowledge and wisdom on life that is going to rewire your brain, not even close. But I know that sometimes all that is needed is to hear someone say something in a manner that you've not heard it before, for it to be a catalyst for you to start thinking and working towards something different in your life. Now, I've been giving it some thought in regards to how we can keep people connected to one another and have discussions and healthy debates and conversations. Of course, Discord was one of the first things that popped into my mind, but one thing is, if you come from TikTok, you know, I will always be honest. And if I'm being honest, I do fear that it can become a cesspool and breeding ground for degeneracy if the wrong people join. So I've been making content enough to know just how miserable some people are and that some people truly do get off on trolling and causing chaos. So I don't want to open the door to that either. So I do think this is an area in which I'm going to have to be flexible and kind of take by ear and get feedback from other people in regards to. I think that's something I should note. I think it's a really important framework to lay down for everybody, especially because this, again, is the introduction to my podcast. Something that I want to note is that free thinking and challenging the norm is a primary and fundamental aspect of philosophy. It is. It's essential to developing different philosophical ideals that are sometimes controversial. But as I said earlier, I also want this to be a channel that encourages progressive thinking and ideals. Therefore, I have to and will apply the principle of the paradox of tolerance by Karl Popper. I think that will eventually be one of the first topics I discuss on this channel, but ultimately, as a framework for this community, I think it's important to remind everyone that we cannot progress as a society of tolerance if tolerance ceases to exist. And if we tolerate intolerance, tolerance will disappear. This is why it's called a paradox. We want to be tolerant, but we don't want to be tolerant of the intolerant because the intolerant will take over. Karl Popper believed, and I certainly do as well, that if society offers intolerant people and extends them tolerance, then they will inevitably destroy the tolerant as well as tolerance in and of itself. The intolerant are not able to engage in rationale, in critical thinking, in logic, or in healthy debate. So this isn't me referring to people who have alternate or differing perspectives to me. In fact, like I said, that is how many people grow. And hopefully it's what I'll be doing for some of you. But rather, this is about truly intolerant beliefs. And that's something that I just won't encourage or tolerate. So I do think that that's important to note. I also think it's important to note that people on the left side of the political spectrum here in the US are not absolved from being intolerant themselves. So keep that in mind moving forward. I know a lot of us and the people who have followed me on TikTok understand that I do have more progressive left-leaning values and ideals, but being on the left side doesn't absolve you from being intolerant. So I think helping people step out of their echo chambers and into a world of logic-driven philosophy will help others understand their own politics, identity, and so much more. Or at least I hope it does, right? As that's one of my goals. So let's discuss the why. This will probably be long-winded like usual. If you have come over from TikTok, you know I can be like that sometimes, which is why people wanted me to go to make podcasts, right? To have long-form content. In fact, I've had hundreds and hundreds of people ask me to make a podcast for the past few months. And yet, it was something I was always quite dismissive of, the idea of it. I just never really cared to actually truly weigh or entertain. And to be honest, content creation of itself, even on TikTok, is something I've always really struggled with, in the sense that I never wanted this. I never wanted this. I never wanted to do content creation in my life. Now, I'm very fortunate and feel very grateful to have built a platform of almost 200,000 people who follow my page. But it was never a goal or a dream or a desire of mine. I know some people, they like the attention. Some people like the influence. Some people like the deals they can make or the money they can make or whatever it is. But for me, I never really cared. I just wanted to post about books. I created my TikTok page about 2 years ago. My username is Books with Amanda212. It was always supposed to just be about books. I just wanted to post about them and get recommendations from other people, and that was it. And so I've always been very inconsistent with TikTok. And over the past 2 years, I would randomly have videos that did pretty well. And so then, of course, I started gaining followers from that. But it wasn't until this past December of 2025, that I decided to lock in and post a little bit more consistently. My friend and I had a conversation, and we both kind of wanted to see, if I took this serious, could I do well? And so I decided to post more consistently. Again, I wasn't super consistent. I didn't post every day, but I posted most of the days of December, which was quite a big feat for me. And in 3 months from then, so December, January, and February, I garnered almost 100,000 followers from where I already was. Because I think I was at about 55,000 followers to start, and I ended up at around 150,000 followers by the end of February. Now, I'm not saying this to puff air up my ass. In fact, I actually had considered slowing down and pulling back because of that. But this is all relevant to my why, which is why I'm explaining this. After realizing that if I wanted to TikTok serious, that I could build a platform, I decided to take the month of March off. I think I only posted 2 picture posts and 1 video in the entire month of March. I had gained 100,000 followers. In the month of December, I had 30 million views. So I took March off. I did so because, like I said earlier, this was never something I yearned for, and yet I was gaining a lot of followers and had over 30 million views in 1 month. That is a lot. And I don't know if humans were truly meant for that sort of viewership, but ultimately that's where we're at, so I've made peace with it. And it's not like it's something that really ever skewed me or myself, because I've never let anybody's perception of me affect me or impact me in any manner. But I'm someone who likes to really think things through. Maybe it's a deficit of mine. Maybe I think too much, but I really do like to think things through. And if you've come here from TikTok, it's one of the reasons why you've never seen me backtrack or apologize for any of my contentious opinions. Because to be quite frank with you, when I share my opinion, I don't share it thinking, oh, this is going to be inflammatory. Oh, this is going to be chaotic. Oh, this is going to be contentious. I genuinely believe what I say. I'm very fortunate that I was able to build a platform off of being honest and authentic, because I've never had to sell out. Now, for some people, that is not a good thing because it does bar me from the opportunity to do brands or sponsorships because nobody wants to do a sponsorship with someone who is inflammatory or contentious or says negative things about consumers of their brand, essentially. So I knew that that would isolate me from that, but I'm okay with it because that means that I get to remain true to myself and my personal beliefs and my ideologies. But anyways, I think things through before I say what I post. Like I don't just post it because no, I think it through. I record it, I watch it a few times and then I post it. But I like to think through any major decisions in my life. And when you talk about publicly putting yourself out there to the point of having 34 million views in 1 month, I actually do think that that requires some thought, or at least for me it does. So I was truly contemplating my future regarding producing content throughout the month of March, and that's why I took that time off. And so over the past few months, I've had so many people of all sorts of walks of life reach out to me in my DMs on TikTok. Most of them have been very appreciative of what I've shared. Even unexpectedly, when I made that video regarding insecure people, it has right now a million likes, multi-millions of views. I actually had quite a few people who identify as an insecure person reach out and thank me for that video. But on the contrary, as you can imagine, I've had some people come in hot and heavy in my DMs, practically comparing me to Hitler. So there's that. Beautiful, wonderful, right? Like you would think that I was slaughtering babies for fun. Um, anyways, I genuinely don't care, but I say this because I have received hundreds to literally almost 1,000 DMs since December. And although I can't read all of them, not even close to reading all of them, I do sometimes read some of them and I'll reply to people and try to express my gratitude for their words of kindness because they don't have to reach out and tell me all these things about how my videos have changed their perspectives. They don't have to do that, but they went other way to do it. And so I am grateful and appreciative for that. So I've been told over the course of the past few months that I've changed so many people's lives and perspectives, which is always so wonderful to think about. And I really do truly feel honored about that. But when I was taking that time off in March to kind of figure out what I wanted to do, I received a message. And that changed the trajectory of what I wanted to do. And I had a final conversation with my husband that solidified my decision to take content creation a bit more serious, to be more consistent and spend more time with it, and then to even move forward with the podcast. So the message I received was from someone in their early 20s who was struggling with suicidal ideations. They reached out to me to thank me and told me that I had saved their life and that one of my videos of mine that they were watching grounded them and brought them out of this anxious thought loop that they were in. And they shared my video with their childhood best friend who also struggled with suicide ideation as well. And they told me that they both discussed my video and it changed their perspectives on life ever since. And out of all the messages I've received, that one was one of my greatest driving forces. There was just something about how it was worded, how they were expressing their vulnerability and openness with me, and just really sharing how it changed their life that stuck with me. And that message forced me to think back to another message that I had received maybe a month or two prior from a 17-year-old young girl. She reached out to me to express how happy she was seeing a woman talk about philosophy, which is something that doesn't seem too often as it's always been quite male dominated. She said I was a representation to her, that as a woman, we really can do this, right? We can be logical, even though the stereotype amongst men is that we're emotional. We can indulge ourselves in deep philosophical discussion. We can be everything that men stereotypically have taken capital over. She told me I had inspired her to start reading more books on philosophy, and it helped her make her decision that this is what she wants to go to college for. I reflected on both of those messages, of the hundreds to the thousands I had received. And something about hearing how my words had not only inspired a young girl and gave her a voice and gave her tangible representation of a woman speaking about and engaging in philosophy, but I also had saved a life. I was reflecting on those messages, and I know I'm not someone who is emotionally expressive. I'm quite chill and stoic, and a lot of people in my personal life just refer to me as being pretty grounded. But I genuinely did feel something pull on my emotions. And so I decided, okay, I should do this. And I wanted to talk to my husband about it and express to him something that I genuinely had an internal conflict with. And if you're new here, if somehow you found my page and you've never seen my TikToks, or maybe you've never seen the ones where I talked about my husband, I'll occasionally talk about my husband because I do think he's a perfect example of emotional intelligence. And I've said before that I think every man should be legally required to sit with my husband for 24 hours before they are allowed to date, and he has to sign off and give them permission. He genuinely is one of the most wonderful human beings I've ever met, and he is my opposite. He is my opposite in terms of personality and in terms of our perspectives on the world. Now, of course, we have shared values and morals. I think that's essential for any sort of healthy relationship. But we're very different. And he's very, very emotional and sensitive and kind hearted. And he really does think everybody deserves a million chances. And so his strengths have tended to be my weaknesses. My strengths have tended to be his weaknesses. And so we've been able to help each other grow in that. So I really do love speaking with him and getting his perspective. So when I sat down and had told him my thoughts, I shared with him the internal conflict that I had that I'm going to share with you all, and I'm going to be open about it. And it is that I felt vain. This all felt very vain to me. And it's not to demean my skills. I know what my strengths and weaknesses are, and I love myself fully knowing all of them. So I do know that I do have communication skills that are strengths. I do know I'm very articulate. I know that. I understand that. But it still felt very, very vain regardless. I try to operate as realistically as possible, and maybe that can be a hindrance to myself at times because sometimes having a false delusional sense of confidence can really get people to where they need to be, but I've always just been naturally confident and just really wanted to ensure that my ego wasn't driving this decision. So I sat and I talked with my husband, and he offered me a perspective that I enjoyed to hear and that really solidified this decision. And what he had said was this: maybe what you have to say isn't 100% unique and special by itself, sure, but those thoughts that you have combined with how you say it and the way in which you say it makes it and makes you unique. And so him and I have always had different debates regarding uniqueness amongst people. That's a different conversation for a different day. But he was right. I sat on that and he was right. I mean, I didn't even have to sit on it. When he said it, I was like, okay, you got a point there, bud. But yeah, I sat on it, thought about it, and he was right. And so the way I'm able to offer perspectives, especially as a woman, I do think is a bit more unique. And I'm not saying that to separate myself from other women and make myself seem like I'm so different and special, because I do love being a woman. I love sisterhood, and I've never taken, oh, you're not like other women as a compliment, because there's nothing wrong with being like other women. I think women are great. But the reason why I say this is because I've been told my whole life, even by other women, how if I were a man, no one would bat an eye at the way I spoke or my opinions. But when you're a woman and you speak the way I speak and you have the opinions I have, you're labeled as all sorts of negative things that are seen as admirable in a man. So I think letting other women out there know that there are more of us out there, and even offering a different approach and perspectives towards talking about different topics for people who are more of my opposites to hear, I think both of those things are important. I think giving representation to women who are like me is important, and I think giving the alternate perspective of women who are not like me is important, but then also even men. I do have, I think, 40% of my followers on TikTok are men. So I'm sure I'll have some men who come over to the podcast, and I really hope you do feel welcomed and will hopefully learn and grow from it as well. But I do think representation matters, right? And I think being a woman and talking about these sorts of things in the way that I talk about it, I do think that that's going to be representative for some women who kind of hide that, because again, it's considered negative when a woman does it, but it's admirable when a man does. With the representation, I think that's super important. I think representation for logical women is important. I think representation for women in philosophy is important. For people who struggle with emotional empathy, because we're always demonized. I've always said I have more of a cognitive empathy rather than an emotional empathy, but that's very demonized. And, you know, I've kind of talked about that a little bit before on TikTok, and I'll certainly talk about it here. I think representation for people who are so confident that people immediately label us or label you as intimidating. I think representation for Hispanics who wanted to get into academia is important. So there's so many groups of people that need to see themselves out there and need to hear from someone like them. And I really hope that I could be that for some of you. And the why goes back to the goal, right? This is not something that I can do on my own, nor do I want to. This is something that I truly feel like a strong community can be created around. I operate in reality, like I said, and maybe it's to a fault at times. So I understand this isn't going to be some revolutionary podcast, but I think it will be impactful enough on an individualistic level for some people that taking time out of my day for it is worth it for me. I've said it before when I made a video on TikTok talking about my husband's emotional intelligence, but if all the hate and vitriol I receive helps just one woman leave an abusive man, if it helps one man disconnect himself from red pill content, if it helps one person who's suffering in silence due to those around them taking advantage of them, if it helps them put themselves first, if that's what my content and this podcast can do, if all the hours I spend recording these podcasts in my home library helps just one person, that was enough for me. And yes, I do get a lot of hate. Like I said, I wasn't joking. I have been compared to Hitler in my DMs. My sisters, I have 3 sisters. So I have 4 siblings. 3 sisters, 1 brother. Me and my sisters are all super close. And when we've talked about content creation and I've expressed how, yeah, I don't even care about it, my sisters have always told me, they're like, yeah, but you're perfect for this stuff because like you don't care what anyone thinks. And my sisters, they lean more toward being a bit more sensitive. One, I would say 1 or 2 of them are kind of people pleasing and they've been working on that. So for them, seeing me this way, we're very radically different in that sense. I genuinely do not care how anyone in this world perceives me. I'm the only one who has to be in my own head for 24 hours. So whatever you say or how you feel about me will never dictate my own perception of myself or how I navigate my life. Your opinion on me doesn't change how I shower. Your opinion on me doesn't change how I have sex. Your opinion on me doesn't change what books I read. I don't care. And so I guess that is a superpower when it comes to making content, especially when you have 34 million views in 1 month and people are calling you evil for expressing your opinions and thoughts. Regardless, I think it's indicative of how little self-control people have. And I kind of find it to be classic projection when you get a bunch of negative or hate comments or DMs. Because in my mind, I think that these people think that because their feelings would be hurt by a hate comment, that mine would be too. Like anyone who gets a hate comment, their feelings have to be hurt because mine would be hurt by that. I think that that's what those people are projecting. Because if you look at my content objectively or just logically, I don't know how in God's green earth anyone would perceive me as being someone who cared. So again, I think it's lack of self-control and projection. So I find it more entertaining than anything else. So I'm willing to continue to take the bullets to the chest to share what is considered at times contentious opinions for the sake of opening up dialogue and conversation. But anyways, yeah, I know this is long-winded like usual. I do take pride in my honesty and I just want to be honest and transparent with you guys. And I wanted to share my heart about why I'm doing this. So some quick things about me before I wrap this introduction episode up. I'm a Chicago snob. I was born in Humboldt Park, lived there for a while in my childhood. Then my parents, in our family, we moved to the south side of Chicago off 55th Street. And my parents didn't want to raise us in that environment. As you can imagine, it was a lot worse then than it is now. And so they kind of took a literal gamble and put a finger on a map, picked a small town to move to. We packed a moving truck. And when we actually got to that small town, my parents didn't even have the deed to the house yet. We weren't even sure if we can actually move into the home that day. It was a gamble, but everything worked out fine in the end. I ended up going back to Chicago to attend college, so my heart has always been and always will be with the city. I love reading books. With my ADHD, it's pretty much the one and only consistent hobby I've ever had. Again, that's why I started my TikTok in the first place. I love the outdoors. I love backpacking, camping, hiking, rock climbing, kayaking, longboarding. I play in a sand league for volleyball. I love to travel. I've been to over 30 states and I've traveled outside the country many times. If you want to consider traveling and you are in the United States of America, you don't have to leave the country to experience very beautiful, amazing, breathtaking things. So don't think that leaving the country is the only way to experience those things. It's not. But yes, I've also traveled outside the country quite a few times. In fact, we have our next international trip planned, and that's going to be China in 2027, and I'm so excited for that. One thing I love to do when I go to other countries is I love to visit cathedrals. And it's funny because I'm not Catholic. In fact, I'm very critical of the Catholic Church. But there's just something to me about humans and this desire and desperation we have for something greater than ourselves out there, that we build these massive, beautiful structures. And I love architecture, so cathedrals tend to be the ones that take my breath away. But I do like to visit all sorts of synagogues and temples and cathedrals. And So yeah, I like to visit a bunch of Catholic churches when I travel. I love to go to museums or take cooking classes in different countries or go to bookstores. I love doing that. I love learning about other people's cultures, their religion, and history. I love puzzles. I love cooking. I love baking. I can go on and on about all the things that I love. But I think overall, I just love constantly growing and learning, and not just about other things, right? I read books learning about all sorts of topics. I go to other countries and I learn about their history and their culture. But it's not just other things that I like learning about. I love learning about myself. And doing these things and having these hobbies teaches me so much about myself. I learned so much about myself when I invest into myself. And that's something you'll hear me talk a lot about, is this idea of feeding your soul. In fact, that's going to be the next topic of my next episode on this podcast, and it's going to be how to feed your soul. Moving forward, I'm going to try to post a podcast at least once a week, but bear with me as I get this all figured out. Depends if I take my medication or not. I might get a little lazy if I don't take my Adderall. But I'm super excited for this journey with you all, and I cannot wait for us to all grow together with one another. I can't wait for myself to learn from you all. I can't wait to share my own perspectives and to see what sort of dialogue can come from this. And I'm super excited for what we can create here together and hope you all stick around for it. I'm going to be cheesy and end with a quote from Epictetus, who is one of my favorite philosophers from one of my favorite schools of philosophy, which is Stoicism. And here's the quote. It is impossible for a man to learn what he thinks he already knows. Again, it is impossible for man to learn what he thinks he already knows. Reflect on that quote this week and moving forward. It's one of my favorites. It keeps me humble. It keeps me grounded. But that is all for today. Amanda the Logician wants to remind you all to stay open, stay hopeful, and stay logical.